An early morning sun was shining outside when the elderly woman walked slowly toward the airport gates, her son right by her side. She wore a light scarf over her shoulders and carried a small handbag close to her chest. Inside that bag were the medicines she could not live without. Her son had reminded her more than once, "Mama, keep it safe. Don't forget you need it if you feel weak." She nodded, smiling softly. This trip was not only about traveling from one city to another. It was about seeing family she had not visited for years. The thought of hugging her grandchildren again made her eyes sparkle with joy. Her son moved carefully around her, guiding her through the crowded airport. He checked the boarding passes, held her arm when she walked slowly, and made sure she sat down whenever she looked tired. To him, this wasn't just a trip. It was a duty, an act of love, and a promise to protect his mother at all costs. The noise of people rushing around, the long lines, and the announcements on loudspeakers didn't matter to him. His eyes stayed fixed on his mother, making sure she was safe and calm. When they finally reached the gate, the elderly woman sighed with relief. Air travel had always felt stressful to her, but with her son by her side, she felt a little stronger. He held her hand as they walked down the narrow passage toward the plane. She was slow, and some passengers behind them looked impatient, but the son didn't care. He adjusted his pace to hers. In his mind, nothing was more important than keeping her steady. They entered the plane, and the son gently guided her to her seat. He placed her bag of medicine carefully under the seat in front of her. He checked twice to be sure it was there. He even bent down and whispered, "It's safe, Mama, don't worry." She smiled, patting his hand. That small bag carried more than just tablets, it carried her lifeline. Without it, she would feel helpless. As she settled in, she looked out of the small airplane window, watching the ground crew move below. For her, flying still carried a kind of wonder, like magic. She had grown up in a time when planes were rare, and every flight still felt like a miracle. She whispered a small prayer under her breath, asking for a safe journey and good health. The son glanced around the cabin, observing the flight attendants preparing, passengers storing luggage, and families settling in. Everything seemed normal, calm, and routine. He thought the hardest part was over. They had made it to the plane, and soon they would be in the air. His mother leaned back in her seat, smiling faintly. He felt relieved, thinking this journey would be smooth. But behind that calm moment, he could not know what was coming. In just a short while, their peaceful trip would turn into chaos. For now, though, there was only love, trust, and the comfort of being together. He reminded himself that this flight was special because it was not about business or pleasure. It was about family. Passengers nearby noticed how gentle he was with his mother. Some smiled quietly, touched by his patience. Others went on with their own routines, unaware that this mother and son would soon become the center of attention. The elderly woman leaned her head against the seat and closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about her children and grandchildren waiting for her. Her heart filled with joy, not fear. The son reached for her hand again, as if silently promising her that nothing could go wrong. He believed it. After all, what trouble could happen on a plane where everything was carefully checked and everyone followed the rules? He had no idea that the real test of his love and courage had not even started yet. For now, all that mattered was the journey beginning, the smiles, the gentle touch of family, the feeling of moving forward toward loved ones. The plane was still on the ground, but in their hearts they were already flying toward hope. The cabin lights glowed softly as passengers settled into their seats. The elderly woman adjusted her scarf and tried to get comfortable, while her son carefully placed her small medicine bag under the seat. He leaned close to her, whispering, "It's right here, Mama, safe." She nodded with relief. Her son straightened up, feeling calm. Everything seemed normal. The soft hum of engines, the chatter of passengers, the rustle of seatbelts clicking into place, but then, one flight attendant walked briskly down the aisle, her expression sharp, her tone firm as she instructed people to stow bags properly. She reached the row where the mother and son sat. Her eyes flicked toward the small medicine bag under the seat. Instead of asking politely, her brows narrowed and her voice carried a note of authority that felt more like suspicion than concern. "What's in that bag?" she asked, pointing down. The elderly woman froze for a moment, not expecting to be questioned. Her son quickly responded, "It's her medicine, ma'am. She needs it." His voice was calm, respectful, but firm. The attendant frowned. "Liquids and medicines need to be declared and kept separately. I can't stay there." The mother's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her scarf. She didn't understand why her medicine, which she had carried through security without issue, was suddenly a problem now. Her son's jaw tightened. "It's prescribed medication," he repeated, his tone sharper this time. "It's not dangerous. She cannot be without it." The attendant didn't soften. Instead, she leaned down, her voice clipped and impatient. "Sir, this is airline policy. If it's not stored properly, I'll have to remove it." The son stared at her in disbelief. "Remove it? That's her lifeline. You can't just take it away." He leaned closer to his mother, who looked at him with nervous eyes. She didn't want trouble, but fear was already creeping in. What if they really took her medicine? What if she needed it during the flight? The attendant stood her ground, arms crossed. "Sir, if you don't comply, this may escalate." Passengers around them began to notice the tension. A woman across the aisle glanced over, whispering to her husband. A young man 2 rows back leaned forward, trying to hear what was going on. The air, which had been calm just moments ago, started to feel heavy, like a storm cloud forming over the seats. The son tried one more time, his voice calmer now but edged with steel. "Listen, she's old, she's sick, and she needs that medicine. It passed through security. It is allowed. Please don't make this harder." The attendant didn't budge. She crouched down, reached out, and without waiting for permission, pulled the bag from under the seat. The elderly woman gasped, reaching for it with shaking hands, but she was too slow. The son's eyes widened in shock. His breath caught in his chest. Passengers turned their heads fully now. The scene was no longer a whisper. It was visible tension filling the aisle. A grandmother a few rows up shook her head, muttering under her breath. A businessman frowned, clearly annoyed but paying attention. The elderly woman pressed her hands together, whispering, "Please, please, that's my medicine." Her voice was soft, breaking with fear. Her son felt his blood heat up, a rush of anger tightening his chest. He stood halfway from his seat, his tall frame towering over the attendant. "Give it back," he demanded, his voice low but trembling with fury. The attendant, perhaps feeling challenged, raised her chin. "Sir, calm down. It will be stored properly. That's the rule." The mother clutched her son's sleeve, whispering, "Don't fight. Don't upset them." But her son shook his head. His heart was pounding too hard now. He could see her frail face, the fear in her eyes, the way her body shook as if her very life had just been snatched from her hands. He looked back at the attendant, his voice stronger now. "This is not just a bag. This is her health. This is her safety. You cannot take it like it's some piece of trash." The tension spread through the cabin. Passengers leaned closer, some nodding in agreement with the son, others whispering angrily about the airline staff. The elderly woman sat silently, her hands folded, her eyes glistening with tears. For her, it felt humiliating, being treated as if her needs were unimportant, as if her survival was an inconvenience. The son clenched his fists, breathing hard. He had promised himself he would protect her on this journey. Now, in the middle of a crowded airplane with strangers watching, he realized that promise was being tested far sooner than he imagined. The quiet flight had turned into a battlefield, not of weapons or war, but of dignity, respect, and love. And though the engines were ready, the seatbelts clicked and the crew prepared for departure, a storm had already started brewing in row 17. The plane cabin was filled with a strange silence after the tense exchange. The elderly woman sat frozen in her seat, her hands trembling on her lap. She could still see the empty space where her medicine bag had been. Her chest rose and fell quickly, not from the climb of altitude, but from fear. For her, that bag was more than pills. It was her shield against weakness, her comfort when pain came suddenly. Without it, she felt naked and helpless. Her son's eyes stayed locked on the flight attendant, who held the small bag as if it was nothing more than extra luggage. He could see the indifference in her face, the way she acted as if his mother's life did not matter. His voice shook with anger, but he kept it steady. "Give it back, now." But instead of listening, the attendant walked a few steps away. She held the bag tightly, ignoring his protests. The son started to rise from his seat, but his mother pulled his sleeve gently. "Don't, son," she whispered, her voice soft and broken. "Don't cause trouble." Her words were soaked with fear, not because she believed the flight attendant was right, but because she had lived long enough to know that sometimes authority can crush you, even when you are innocent. The son looked down at her, his heart twisting. He wanted to protect her, but he also didn't want her to panic. Yet deep inside he felt something stronger than fear. It was the burning fire of injustice. He had brought her on this trip to keep her safe, and now, in front of everyone, she was being humiliated. The flight attendant didn't return the bag. Instead, she stepped toward the trash compartment near the galley. Passengers gasped as they watched. The son's breath caught in his throat. He could not believe what he was seeing. Without hesitation, she opened the small bin and dropped the medicine bag inside as if it were useless. The sound of it falling was soft, but to the son and his mother it echoed like thunder. The elderly woman let out a sharp cry, covering her mouth with both hands. Her body shook violently, her eyes wide with disbelief. "No, no," she whispered. Her face turned pale and her fingers clutched at her chest. That small act, so careless and cruel, had stolen the fragile sense of security she carried with her. The son stood up immediately, his chair scraping against the floor. Passengers turned fully now, their eyes wide, their voices rising. Some whispered in shock, others muttered angrily. A woman in the row behind spoke loudly. "You can't just throw her medicine away. What's wrong with you?" But the flight attendant brushed it off, her tone cold. "Sir, sit down. The flight must proceed." The son felt a surge of heat rush through him. His fists clenched, his jaw tightened. He leaned forward, his voice shaking with rage. "That was her medicine. You threw away the only thing keeping her alive." His voice carried through the cabin and people gasped again. The elderly woman held onto her chest, her breathing shallow. Tears rolled down her cheeks, not only from fear of her health but from the humiliation of being treated as if she did not matter. She looked at her son with desperate eyes, silently begging him to do something. The son could no longer stay calm. His voice grew louder. "This isn't policy, this is cruelty. You endangered her life." Other passengers started to join in. A man 2 rows down shouted, "Give her medicine back!" Another woman shook her head in disgust. "This is outrageous." The tension spread like fire through the cabin. People who had been strangers just minutes ago now united in shock and anger at what they had witnessed. But the flight attendant still refused to admit wrongdoing. She crossed her arms, standing stiff as if her authority was more important than the truth. The son turned to his mother, who now leaned weakly against her seat. Her hands trembled as she tried to catch her breath. His heart pounded harder than ever. He realized this wasn't just about dignity anymore. This was about survival. Without her medicine, the risk was real. Her health could fail in the middle of the flight. His voice dropped, but his tone grew sharper, colder. "If this plane takes off without that medicine, I will not let it fly." His words were like a knife cutting through the noise. Everyone went silent for a moment, their eyes darting between him and the crew. The elderly woman weakly shook her head, whispering, "Son, please." But he was past the point of silence. For him, the shocking act of discarding that medicine was not only an insult, it was a threat to his mother's life, and he was ready to do whatever it took to make sure she would not suffer because of someone else's arrogance. The plane's engines hummed in the background, ready for takeoff. But inside the cabin, a storm of anger, fear, and defiance was now in full motion, and everyone knew this flight would not be ordinary. The cabin was tense, every passenger holding their breath. The medicine bag was gone, discarded as if it meant nothing. The elderly woman sat hunched in her seat, clutching her scarf close to her chest. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "Why would they do this? Why me?" Her words broke her son's heart. He looked at her, then at the flight attendant, and something inside him snapped. For years he had watched his mother struggle with health problems. He had seen her fight through nights of pain, mornings of weakness, and countless doctor visits. That small bag was her lifeline, and now it had been thrown away by someone who didn't even care enough to ask. The son stood tall, his presence commanding attention. He raised his voice so everyone could hear. "You threw away her medicine. Do you even understand what you've done?" His words were sharp, like thunder rolling across the cabin. Passengers leaned forward, watching closely, their eyes filled with sympathy for the elderly woman and curiosity about what would happen next. The flight attendant tried to stay firm. "Sir, calm down. You are disturbing the other passengers." But her words only fueled his anger. "Disturbing? You think I'm disturbing this flight? My mother's life has just been put in danger, and you call it a disturbance? No, this is not a disturbance. This is negligence. This is cruelty." His voice shook with fury, but behind it was raw pain. The pain of a son watching his mother suffer. The elderly woman touched his arm weakly, whispering, "Please sit down. I don't want them to throw us out." Her eyes were full of fear, but her son could no longer obey her gentle plea. He had promised himself he would always protect her, and now was the moment that promise mattered more than ever. He turned to the passengers, his voice carrying across the rows. "If this was your mother, your father, your loved one, would you stay silent? Would you let someone throw away their medicine like garbage?" His words hit hard. Some passengers nodded, some spoke out loud. "He's right. That's unacceptable." The cabin began to murmur with agreement, the people's voices mixing into one powerful current. The son's anger grew steady, more controlled now. He pointed toward the front of the plane. "This flight will not move until my mother's medicine is returned. I don't care what you say. I don't care what threats you make. She will not fly without it." The attendant stiffened, clearly rattled by his boldness. She tried again. "Sir, if you refuse to sit down, we will be forced to involve security." But the son's eyes burned with determination. He leaned forward, his words cutting through her authority like a blade. "Involve whoever you want. Call the captain. Call the police. Call the entire airline if you must. But I will not sit down while my mother's life is in danger. You will not silence me. You will not silence her." The elderly woman's hand trembled as she held onto her chest. Her son bent down for a moment, his fierce voice softening as he whispered to her, "Don't be afraid, Mama, I'm here. No one will hurt you. I promise." She looked up at him with teary eyes, a mixture of fear and pride. Passengers began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Some started to clap softly, supporting him. Others raised their voices. "Give the bag back. She needs her medicine." The flight attendant's authority was slipping. The son had turned the cabin into a courtroom, and the jury of passengers was clearly on his side. The captain's voice suddenly came over the intercom, calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We are experiencing a situation that must be resolved before takeoff." His words only confirmed what everyone already knew. The flight was now at a standstill because of the son's stand. The son raised his voice again, this time even louder, his words filled with unshakable power. "This plane is not going anywhere until my mother's dignity is restored. You tried to silence her. You tried to take away her health. But you will not succeed. Not while I'm here." The passengers erupted in support, clapping and shouting. Some pulled out their phones, recording the confrontation. The son's words carried beyond the cabin now, captured in videos that would soon spread far outside the airplane walls. The flight attendant looked shaken, unsure what to do next. She had underestimated the strength of a son's love, the unbreakable bond that made him willing to fight an entire airline if that's what it took. The elderly woman leaned back in her seat, her eyes wet with tears. For a moment she forgot her fear. Watching her son stand tall, fearless, and unyielding, she felt something she had not felt in years. Pride. Her son was not just her caretaker. He was her shield, her warrior, her voice when hers trembled too much to speak. The engines of the plane continued to hum softly, waiting for the command to take off. But everyone knew this flight was no longer in the hands of the crew. It was in the hands of one determined son who refused to bow down, and with every second that passed the tension grew heavier, the silence thicker, and the outcome more uncertain. One thing was clear: the flight would not move forward until justice was served. The cabin was no longer just a quiet space filled with strangers waiting for takeoff. It had turned into a stage where emotions clashed: fear, anger, compassion, and disbelief. The elderly woman sat weakly in her seat, her hands still trembling, her heart racing. Her son stood like a shield beside her, his body tense, his voice echoing with determination. But now something unexpected began to happen. The other passengers who had been silent witnesses until now started to stir. At first, it was only whispers. A woman across the aisle leaned toward her husband and said, "She needs her medicine. This isn't right." A young man in the back shook his head and muttered, "Unbelievable. How could they do that?" Their voices weren't loud, but they spread like sparks in dry grass, lighting up the silence with murmurs of agreement. Then one passenger finally spoke up loud enough for everyone to hear. A middle-aged man in a business suit raised his voice. "She's right. This is wrong. That medicine is her right." His words drew nods from nearby seats. Another woman, cradling a baby in her arms, added, "If that was my mother, I'd be furious too." Her voice trembled, but it carried conviction. The son looked around, surprised. Strangers, people he had never met, were standing with him. Their support gave him more strength, more fire. He raised his voice again, looking straight at the attendant. "You see? Everyone knows this is wrong. Everyone sees what you've done." The attendant's expression faltered for the first time. Her lips pressed together, and her eyes flicked nervously toward the front of the plane. Authority was slipping from her grasp, slipping into the hands of the very passengers she was supposed to control. Another passenger stood up. A young woman in jeans and a t-shirt, her phone already recording. "I have this on video," she announced loudly. "If you don't fix this, the whole world will see what you did to this woman." Gasps filled the cabin, followed by claps of support. A few more passengers pulled out their phones, recording every moment. The hum of cameras clicking and red record lights blinking became part of the tense atmosphere. The son glanced at his mother, who looked overwhelmed, her cheeks wet with tears. She whispered, "I never wanted this. I just wanted to fly peacefully." He squeezed her hand gently, whispering back, "Mama, this isn't just about flying anymore. This is about respect. This is about your life." Suddenly, a man 2 rows behind shouted, "Give her medicine back. She's someone's mother. She deserves dignity." His words were met with clapping. The noise grew louder, filling the plane with a chorus of voices. Some passengers stomped their feet against the floor. Others raised their voices in unison. "Give it back. Give it back!" The flight attendant tried to calm the crowd, holding up her hands. "Please, everyone, remain seated. The crew has this under control." But she was wrong. The crew didn't have control anymore. The people did. And the people were on the side of the elderly woman and her son. The son raised his hand, asking for quiet, and when the cabin grew still, his voice rang out like steel. "This is not about one bag. This is not about one rule. This is about humanity. My mother's life is not a piece of luggage you can throw away. If you think I will stay silent while she suffers, you are wrong. And if you think these passengers will ignore it, you are even more wrong." His words stirred the passengers even more. Some clapped, others shouted, "Yes." One woman placed her hand on the elderly woman's shoulder, whispering gently, "We're with you, don't be afraid." The elderly woman looked up, her eyes full of tears, but for the first time, those tears weren't just of fear. They were mixed with gratitude. Strangers had become her protectors. The noise grew so strong that the captain himself had to send another announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, please stay calm. This situation will be addressed." His voice was steady, but there was a hint of hesitation. He knew what everyone knew now. This flight could not continue until this fire was put out. The son straightened his shoulders, his voice filled with a new kind of strength. "This is not just my fight anymore. This is our fight. If they can do this to her, they can do it to anyone. We won't let them." The cabin erupted with applause. The once quiet group of strangers had now turned into an army of voices. They had chosen their side, and it wasn't the airlines. It was with the elderly woman, whose medicine had been tossed away, and her son, who refused to bend under pressure. The flight attendant looked cornered, her authority shattered by the very passengers she was supposed to serve. For the first time, she took a step back, her eyes wide, as if she understood she had started something far bigger than she could ever control. And in that moment, the son knew he was no longer standing alone. He was standing with dozens of others, all united in one demand: justice for his mother. The roar of voices inside the cabin was louder than the engines outside. The passengers had chosen their side, and the airline staff could feel the pressure rising like a storm. The elderly woman sat trembling, her hand pressed against her chest, trying to steady her breathing. Her son remained on his feet, tall and unshaken, his eyes fixed on the flight attendant who had discarded the medicine. But now his anger had turned into something sharper, something unmovable. He wasn't just fighting for his mother anymore. He was fighting for justice in front of everyone. The captain had made an announcement urging calm, but it had little effect. The passengers' voices kept swelling, some demanding the medicine back, others recording the confrontation on their phones. Every second the situation stretched on, the pressure mounted. The son raised his voice again, this time speaking slowly and firmly, as though each word was carved in stone. "This plane will not move. Not 1 inch, not until my mother's medicine is returned. Gasps spread through the rows. Some passengers clapped instantly, supporting his defiance. Others shifted nervously, realizing what his words meant. If the plane did not move, they would all be delayed. But even those who disliked delays could not deny the truth. The elderly woman's rights had been violated, and her son's stand was righteous. The flight attendant stiffened, but she could not argue against the rising tide of passengers echoing his demand. "Give it back! Give it back!" The chant grew stronger, filling the cabin like a drumbeat. The son folded his arms, planting himself firmly in the aisle. His body was unyielding like a wall blocking the path forward. The crew tried to intervene. Another flight attendant approached, her voice softer, her tone more careful. "Sir, please sit down. We will sort this out." But the son shook his head, his jaw set. "You've already shown how you treat her. Words aren't enough now. I want her medicine back in her hands before this plane takes off. If that doesn't happen, then no one here is going anywhere." Passengers cheered in agreement. A businessman in the back shouted, "He's right. We won't move either." A young woman stood up with her phone raised, recording every second. "We're not flying until she's safe," she declared. More voices joined. The cabin had turned into a wave of resistance. The elderly woman tugged at her son's sleeve weakly. "Please don't do this. Everyone will hate us," she whispered. But he bent down, holding her hand with both of his voice gentle and unshaken. "Mama, listen to me. They will not hate you. They will respect you. They will see that you matter." She looked into his eyes, and for the first time she saw not the boy she had raised, but the man who now stood like a warrior for her dignity. The captain had no choice. He left the cockpit and entered the cabin, his uniform crisp, his face serious. The chatter softened for a moment as everyone turned to him. "Sir," the captain said firmly, addressing the son, "this flight cannot depart while you are blocking the aisle. I need you to sit down so we can move forward." But the son did not move. His voice was strong, steady, and filled with conviction. "Captain, with all respect, this flight cannot depart because my mother's safety has already been destroyed. You have a duty to protect passengers, and today you failed. If you think I'll let this plane take off while her life hangs in the balance, you're mistaken. This flight is grounded until her medicine is returned." His words echoed like thunder in the cabin. Silence fell for a moment, heavy and powerful. Then, as if on cue, the passengers broke into applause. Some cheered. Others shouted, "Ground the plane!" The son's words had become their voice, their demand. The captain's jaw tightened. He glanced at the crew, at the angry faces of passengers, at the frail woman in the seat. He knew he was losing control. He knew that until this was resolved, the engines could roar all they wanted, but the plane would never leave the ground. The flight attendant who had started it all looked pale now. The weight of dozens of eyes on her was too much. Still, she tried to defend herself. "It was policy. I was only following the rules." But the son's reply was swift and cutting. "Policy does not give you the right to endanger someone's life. Policy does not allow you to strip someone of dignity. Don't hide behind rules. Own what you did." The passengers roared in agreement. The chant started again, louder this time. "Give it back! Give it back!" The sound rolled through the cabin like thunder, unstoppable and unified. The captain sighed, realizing the inevitable. He picked up the intercom and spoke in a controlled voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a situation on board, this flight will not depart until further notice. Please remain seated." And just like that, the son's words had come true. The flight was stalled. The engines quieted, the forward motion halted. The airline's power had been stopped by a single man's refusal to bow down. The elderly woman looked around, still overwhelmed, but her eyes filled with something new. Hope. For the first time in years, she did not feel invisible. She did not feel small. Her son had made the world stop for her. The passengers looked at him with admiration. To them, he wasn't just a protective son anymore. He was the reason their flight had been grounded, the man who had turned a simple journey into a battle for justice. And as the plane sat unmoving on the runway, everyone knew this was no longer just about flying to their destination. This was about standing up for what was right. The engines outside hummed low, but inside the cabin the storm of voices had taken over. The passengers were no longer restless travelers waiting for takeoff. They had become witnesses to a battle between dignity and authority. The elderly woman sat quietly, Still shaken, her hands pressed tightly together. She looked fragile, but beside her, her son stood like an unshakable wall. His voice had already stopped the flight, and now everyone waited to see what would happen next. The captain stood in the aisle, his face tense. He had flown through storms, navigated emergencies, and handled dozens of delays. But this was different. A son's fury, a mother's trembling health, and an entire cabin full of angry passengers had grounded his plane. He cleared his throat, trying to sound firm. "Sir," he said, "if you do not comply, we will be forced to remove you from this aircraft." The son's eyes did not flinch. His voice was steady, every word heavy with fire. "Remove me if you want. But this plane isn't flying until you fix what has been done. My mother's life matters more than your schedule. If she doesn't get her medicine back, then this flight is over." Passengers erupted again, shouts, claps, voices rising. A woman near the front called out, "He's right. We're not moving until she gets her medicine." Another voice from the back added, "This isn't just his fight, it's ours too." The sound of support rolled through the cabin like waves crashing against a shore. The flight attendant who had thrown away the bag stood frozen near the galley. Her confidence had vanished. She had thought her authority would silence the man, but instead, it had backfired. Dozens of eyes glared at her, some filled with disgust, others with anger. She crossed her arms, but her trembling hands gave her away. The captain knew he had no choice. He signaled to the crew. Moments later, ground staff entered the plane, their uniforms crisp, their expressions nervous. The passengers booed loudly. Phones were raised higher, capturing every second. This wasn't just a private dispute anymore. It was a public reckoning. The son turned toward them, his voice cutting through the noise. "Do you know what your crew has done? Do you know they threw away her medicine? Do you understand you put her life in danger?" He pointed at his mother, her frail body hunched against the seat, her face pale. "Look at her. Look at the woman you tried to silence. Is this how you treat your passengers?" Gasps and shouts followed his words. Some passengers clapped. Others shouted, "Shame!" The pressure in the cabin was unbearable now. The ground staff looked helpless. They couldn't drag him off the plane, not with dozens of cameras recording, not with passengers chanting in unison. The son raised his voice one last time, clear and defiant. "I will not sit down. I will not stay silent. Until my mother's medicine is returned, this flight is grounded. You cannot move forward until you give her back what you stole." The cabin exploded in applause. Passengers pounded on armrests, shouted, and clapped together. The chant returned, louder than ever. "Give it back. Give it back." The walls of the aircraft seemed to vibrate with the force of their unity. The elderly woman looked around with wide eyes, tears streaming down her face. But this time, they were not only tears of fear, they were tears of pride. She reached up with her trembling hand and touched her son's arm. "You stopped the plane for me," she whispered, her voice breaking. He bent down, kissed her forehead gently, and replied, "I'd stop the whole world if I had to, Mama." The captain turned away, speaking quietly into his radio. The message was clear. The plane would not depart. After a long pause, he made the announcement over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to the situation on board, this flight has been grounded until further notice. We appreciate your patience." The son exhaled slowly. He had done it. He had forced an entire airline to stop, not with power or money, but with love, anger, and courage. The passengers clapped again, some standing, some shouting encouragement. One man leaned into the aisle and said, "You did the right thing, brother." A woman added, "Your mother is lucky to have you." The flight attendant who had started it all lowered her eyes, unable to meet the stares burning into her. Her authority was gone, her actions condemned in front of everyone. She turned and disappeared toward the galley, leaving only silence behind her. For the first time since the ordeal began, the elderly woman leaned back in her seat, her breathing slow but steadier. She looked at her son with watery eyes. "I thought I was weak," she whispered, "but you showed me I was not invisible." He squeezed her hand tightly. "You are never invisible, Mama. Not while I'm here." And so the engine stayed quiet. The runway remained still and the plane sat unmoving. The son's stand had turned into justice. He had grounded not just the flight, but the arrogance of those who thought a powerless voice could be ignored. The plane sat still on the runway, the air inside heavy with tension and exhaustion. Passengers shifted in their seats, some whispering, some still recording on their phones. The elderly woman leaned back, her body weak but her spirit strangely lighter. For the first time in years, she felt that strangers had seen her, respected her, and stood with her. She was no longer just an old woman with medicine. She had become the reason an entire flight had stopped. Her son sat beside her now, his hand still wrapped around hers, but his eyes remained sharp, scanning the crew, the captain, and the ground staff. He knew the fight was not over. He had grounded the flight, but justice had not yet been delivered. His voice was lower now, calmer, but it carried the same strength. I will not move until my mother gets her medicine back. You owe her that. Passengers nodded in agreement, murmuring their support. A woman across the aisle leaned forward and said softly, "We're with you." Another man added, "This should never have happened. Don't back down." Their words made the son's resolve even stronger. Finally, after long minutes that felt like hours, a senior airline official boarded the plane. His uniform was pressed, his expression serious, and his eyes wary of the dozens of cameras still recording. He walked straight to the son and his mother. "Sir, ma'am," he began, his voice careful, "we regret what happened. The medicine was removed by mistake. We will retrieve it immediately." Gasps filled the cabin. Passengers exchanged glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief. A woman muttered, "Mistake?" They threw it away on purpose. The son didn't flinch. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on the official. "Bring it back now and apologize to her." The official nodded quickly, disappearing down the aisle. Within minutes, another staff member returned, carrying the small bag. It was slightly crumpled but intact. The sight of it made the elderly woman's eyes fill with tears. She reached out with trembling hands, clutching it close to her chest as if it were gold. Her voice cracked with emotion. "Thank you. Thank you." The passengers clapped, some cheering, others sighing with relief. But the son wasn't finished. He stood again, his voice calm but unyielding. "This is not just about returning a bag. This is about accountability. You humiliated her. You endangered her, and you thought no one would care. Today, everyone cared. Today you learned that people will stand together when something is wrong." The passengers clapped louder, the sound rolling through the cabin like thunder. Some stood raising their hands in support. The flight attendant who had thrown the bag away was nowhere to be seen. Her absence spoke louder than any defense she could have made. The captain made another announcement. His voice was formal but heavy with resignation. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to the delay, this flight will remain grounded while we review the situation. We sincerely apologize for the inconvenience." But the passengers didn't mind. For them, this wasn't an inconvenience. It was justice. News of the incident spread quickly. Videos taken by passengers were uploaded within minutes, shared across social media. Millions would soon see the son standing tall in the aisle, his voice fierce and unwavering, his mother trembling beside him. They would see the chants of strangers, the clapping, the unity, and they would see how one man's courage forced an airline to stop. The elderly woman wiped her tears, holding her son's hand tightly. "You did this for me," she whispered, her voice soft. "You stopped the plane for me." He kissed her hand gently and replied, "I'd stop the whole world if it meant keeping you safe." Around them, passengers smiled, some patting the son on the shoulder as they passed. A woman with a baby leaned down and whispered, "You reminded us all what it means to fight for family." A man in a suit added, "You made us believe again that we can make a difference."